All right, it is 6 o'clock and I will call this meeting of the Lunenburg Town Council to order. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. With that, I will look for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Are there any additions or deletions to note? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. That takes us on to the September 14th and 15th council meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to approve those as circulated? Moved by any errors or omissions to note? Opposed? The motion is tonight from the Citizens for Public. The treasurer is here, and I think we also have Penny Mundell. Turn the floor over to them, and Megan, you have 10 minutes to make your presentation.
How's that? Mayor, thanks for inviting us, and thanks to all you councillors. And I was looking back through my notes, and the last time we made a presentation to council was 2020. But I think maybe Peter Mosher was here, but the rest of you are new since then, I think. So I certainly won't take more than 10 minutes, but I hope you'll follow along with the slides. You can switch over now to, I just want to introduce our board to you, because all of us we're really dedicated volunteers, and most of us have been working for several years for Citizens for Public Transit. So we have Barbara Carthew, who lives down by Kingsburg, Stuart Frank, who is our president, he lives in Bridgewater, Penny Mundell, who's here with me tonight, Jack Schoon, who lives here in town, Bill Snyder lives up in Wynot Settlement. And I'm pleased to read out the names to you and to let you know that if ever community members come to you and talk to you about public transit, we'd be really happy if you would refer them to us, because we're constantly looking for new members, and we have a couple of new members lined up to be voted in at our upcoming annual general meeting. So our mandate on slide 2 is to promote the establishment of a cost-effective, safe, affordable, accessible regional public transit system in the municipality of Lunenburg. And our real goal is to have a bus that will take us around in a loop around the 3 towns and subsequently expand to include New Germany and other places. And, you know, we have this vision of a bus that will cater to townspeople with medical appointments in Bridgewater, shoppers, students who want to stay late at school in Bridgewater and then get home, tourists. And we hold that vision, and we stick to it. So we believe that when anybody takes a bus, we all win. And there are environmental, economic, social, health, and equity benefits to public transit. It's an essential service and merits public support, just like utilities, roads, highways, bridges, parks, and sidewalks. So we very strongly argue this point that public transit is a human right and a right of citizens in communities. There have been a few successes in the years that we've been working. There was a joint transit committee created among the 4 municipal regions here, and it worked away, but it got sidetracked, basically bogged down and disappeared. The startup of the Bridgewater transit system was a real triumph for a small town like Bridgewater, and we helped along the way and contributed to all the conversations. And they've been so successful, you probably know that they've bought new buses and that their ridership just keeps growing, and they're very proud of it. And when the Maritime Bus decided to start running a bus every day from here to Halifax, we were involved with that, and sadly, it's been cut back to 3 days a week. I think they're at 3 days now, but they've managed to continue. And They've, although they're not public transit, it's privately owned by a PEI family, but they've managed to crack off some significant government funding to keep going. And they work as a feeder branch where people who come on the Maritime bus into Halifax often connect to Fredericton and other places. So now we're on slide 4. So we obtained a $30,000 grant a few years ago to produce a transit feasibility study using a firm called CBCL, which is the firm in Halifax. It's connected with Daltech that does this kind of study. And the report, you know, we really carefully structured it as a feasibility study, that, you know, we know that it can work, and we just wanted them to propose ways that we could make it work. And the report is dedicated to Norm Hazlitt, who some of you may remember. He was the founder of Citizens for Public Transit, and he was a very strong push for it. And the night that we presented the study in the fire hall in Bridgewater, Norm Hazlitt was dying in the hospital. So he lived to see the end of the study, but not much more. Anyways, most of us are inspired by his example to keep working. So for slide 5, goals for the pub. You were on the right one. If you just go back. So we want to connect Lunenburg, Mahone Bay, Bridgewater, and Modal. We want to expand over time. We want to help with the post-pandemic infrastructure rebound. And we want to meet community needs and provide access for residents. And we really want to focus on positive outcomes of a public transit system and persuade people that public transit is like the roads and other services that are provided to citizens, so that people don't say, oh, well, we're too small, we won't have enough ridership to make enough money. Well, it's not about making enough money. It's about providing a service and access for citizens. Let me see where I am now. I'm on slide 5. So one of the things we recognized in the past year or so was that success means that the 4 municipal districts will work together. And so we decided that our strategy was going to be to convene groups from the 4 municipalities, and we've been working with a group of planners. We've had 2 meetings with them online over the winter, and we find that working with the planners is very effective because you don't have to persuade them their it is. And most of them are pretty keen to see something happen. And also in the winter, we convened a meeting with the planners and the Utilities Review Board, because they keep talking about how difficult it is to get permission or licensing through the Utilities and Review Board for transit systems. Well, it turns out when you go to the Dragon's Den and talk to them, they're not dragons after all. They really want to see this kind of system work. And so I think that the problem that exists in Bridgewater, which is that the town transit system can't cross the 103 and go to Osprey Village, because it goes into another territory and they have to get permission from the Utilities and Review Board. It turns out that's not such a huge problem. And recently, Modal has requested Bridgewater to work on the problem of how to get to the Canadian Tire Mall in Osprey Village. And Bridgewater is in the process of issuing an RFP to get a study done to figure out how they can do it. But at the same time, they realize that just expanding the Bridgewater system to Osprey Village isn't sufficient. You know, while you're doing that, you might as well just go the whole way and set up this little bus system that we're talking about. So we're keeping that idea on the table, and Stuart Frank met with the Bridgewater Council about a month ago.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
And they discussed this idea, and I'll just segue to saying that Stuart has now met with Bridgewater, Mahone Bay, and Modal, and this meeting with you completes our cycle of meeting with all the councils at this time. Slide 6, that's it. So we think that the pressure to get a transit system is mounting. We all know that our towns are expanding and that we have had an influx of new home buyers, many of them with young families, the kind of people who would be happy not to have a two-car family and be able to put their high school kids on a bus or use it themselves to do their shopping. Recently, the modal staff did a projection of the average age in this area, and it's going to, by 2040, the average age is projected to be 65 years old, indicating that there will be more seniors looking to leave the car parked and avail themselves of public transit. Also, during the time, I ran out of time. I'll just say
we'll give you
one or two more things, that the environmental issue around too many cars has become a stronger and stronger force in our advocacy efforts over the last few years, and we're really pushing that side of it. And there continues to be more funding available for infrastructure projects in the post-pandemic climate. So we think we're in a sweet spot for public transit.
Perfect. And I'm sure all councillors have had the opportunity to go through the PowerPoint that was provided in the package in advance. So I'll just open the floor up to see if there's any questions of Megan at this stage. Councillor Halverson.
I just noticed one of the points here, you're talking about developing a transit authority. How would that be developed? Where would that rest? Who would how does that work?
Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to tell you that exactly, except to say that you have to have a transit authority to run the transit system. So to me, it seems like it would be members of the 4 municipal government groups who would run that. Yeah. I could also mention that our annual general meeting is happening October 23rd at LCLC. That's Saturday afternoon at 2:00, and we'll have a panel discussion and a chance to talk more broadly with people about it.
Thanks, Megan. Any further questions? Megan, I have one. Just what kind of reception did you get at the other municipalities when you did this round of presentations?
I would say Bridgewater, it's sort of ironic because Bridgewater has taken care of their public transit needs, but because they've been so successful, I think they want to see it push out. So Bridgewater is definitely there. Modal has staff members who are well-versed in the issue and very keen on it, and the same thing for Mahone Bay. So we've received really good support from all of them.
It's been very positive.
Yeah. So is there anything else you might need or want to hear about, or any suggestions for how we proceed, or?
Well, I think, like all small towns in Nova Scotia, we're pretty cash strapped, and that's always our issue. So, for us to participate, it would have to be financially.
Infrastructure.
There is federal funding available.
No, I know, and
of
that's what
course,
I
for
mean.
Public transit, yeah.
I think that there's an opportunity probably for densification along routes once routes are established, but the question is always who eats the operating losses until they are established.
Yeah.
I take your point about the cost benefit, and I look at the cost benefit mostly as being ridership, not necessarily profitability.
Yes. Yeah.
The question would be, is the density there to justify it, or could the density be built, and who pays for the loss in the meantime? But I'm sure this is something that'll come up with in future discussions amongst the municipalities now that you've presented to all the various councils.
There is another source of funding, which is the dial-a-ride service and the chits that the social welfare department gives to people to take taxis. There's a feeling that those departments would be happy to contribute, and they'd get more bang for their buck by having people take the bus and sending them places in taxis. And also people prefer to, manage their own schedules and not be driven around by drive services, I think.
Thanks, Megan. Any further questions? Okay.
Thanks,
none,
thanks
for
for
coming in.
listening, and I hope that someday we'll be sitting around a transit authority table.
On the bus.
Yeah,
All right.
we'll just quietly leave.
Sounds good. So there's no correspondence on tonight's agenda, and that takes us to unfinished business and to the wastewater treatment plant upgrades and treated effluent outfall extension, proposed implementation plan, the report by Sarah Meslin. So Sarah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight, I will be presenting a memo on the proposed implementation plan, which is intended to tie together the 4 reports for the outfall extension, the near-term upgrades, long-term upgrades, and the building assessment report, and to show a possible way forward for the town to be able to implement the recommendations contained in these reports. The recommendations were developed based on extensive discussions and consultation with Public Works, including Dennis, Ian, Peter, John, and Paul. And in particular, I'd like to point to the Kepner-Trego decision analysis process, which I think was really valuable in looking at all the options that were possible and working through the pros and cons of each one to come to a group recommendation. So I'll start with the outfall extension report. And the main recommendation from this report is to proceed with detailed design and construction of a relocated effluent outfall in the Burma Road location. And the first steps for this would be to start by sending the pre-design report to Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change. And it's particularly important with this report, although it applies to all of them, because in this case, we would want not only to inform them, but also to get a decision on whether a receiving water study would be necessary in order to go forward with detailed design. If required, the receiving water study would take some time and data gathering in order to do, and so it needs to be planned for. And it would help to confirm the design criteria to be certain of those before moving forward with detailed design. The regulatory consultation process for the outfall would take significant time to complete. And so that should also be started as soon as possible in order to give enough time and avoid holding up the construction process at the end. Also, we'd recommend beginning discussions around land and water lot access or acquisition in order to make sure that the site is available as recommended. Then following that, once the site is confirmed, geotechnical investigation and a bathymetry survey to give the data needed for detailed design, and then following the regulatory approval to complete the tender and construction of this process. Okay, next slide, please. The ways in which this recommendation is interconnected with the other reports is less so than for some of the others. It could be done at any time compared to the other ones. However, there would be a reduced effect on the commercial fishing fleet here and the users of the inshore fisherman's wharf, especially during tie-ins, during construction of an expansion, if the outfall extension was completed first. Okay, thank you. Then moving on to the near-term upgrade summary, the main recommendation from this one is to carry out detailed design and construction of 8 of the 11 items that were looked at as part of this report. The remaining 3 items would not be required, assuming the expansion goes ahead fairly soon, within the next 10 years. And for this one, also to send the pre-design report to NSECC for their comment, and then proceed with the highest priority items to do detailed design and then regulatory applications and construction of them. And during that time, also to plan out and prioritize the other items and prepare for detailed design of those if the schedule warrants it. So depending on how soon the expansion of the plant is planned to take place. So next slide, please. So this table shows all of the recommended items from the near-term upgrades, and the highest priority ones are given a 0 to 1 year time to implement as a recommended implementation time. So that is the flood control, the UV disinfection expansion, and the polymer pumps. In the other report, there was a polymer dosing system replacement, but if the plant expansion was going to take place within about 5 to 10 years, then there really wouldn't be a driver to replace the whole system, and the pumps alone, which are in poor condition at this time, are the priority item. They, I believe, are already in the budget for this year for just the pump replacement. And then we'd recommend that the flood control and UV expansion items be brought forward, with the rest of the items occurring at a time that makes sense based on when the expansion is planned. So these have also been given a priority weighting, so the sooner that they're recommended, then the higher priority they are. But a number of them could wait and be done with the plant expansion if that was expected to happen within about 5 years. And there are some advantages to doing so, particularly for the blower replacement and the standby generator. So if the blowers were replaced before the plant expansion, they would work for the new SBR, but they're actually bigger than needed. So it would be perhaps more efficient to wait and do the expansion and blower replacement at the same time, as long as the blowers can last until then. And so in lieu of looking at doing that work right away, we'd recommend that a manufacturer's tech come in and do an inspection and refurbishment of the existing blowers and be able to say whether there is 5 years life left in them or not, and then act on that basis rather than automatically replacing them at this point. As well, if the blower replacement happened at that time, it may be possible to install the blowers in the existing process room where the DAFs currently are, and that might avoid having to do an electrical room expansion to fit the generator equipment, particularly the transfer switch and the new panel. So there could be some cost savings coming from those items by doing them slightly later with the expansion, as long as it's in the fairly near term. Okay. For the long-term expansion, the main recommendation is to proceed first with the pre-design, including a thorough geotechnical investigation, because one of the risks for this option is that the geotechnical conditions are quite poor on the site and there are some significant unknowns about them. And following the geotechnical investigation, then do detailed design and construction of an SBR-based expansion. The next steps for this are more involved than for some of the others, including continuing influence sampling, which is currently going on to get design data, and also to proceed with saltwater exclusion work and a sewer separation plan in order to be able to expand the plant to 50% more organics capacity without raising the flows at the same time. And with this, we'd recommend to apply for funding as soon as an opportunity allows, as with the Outfall, and then to go with a pre-design of the expansion to take into account the geotechnical data and be able to firm up the sizing, and then send that to NSCCC and go ahead with detailed design, regulatory approval, and tender and construction following that process. The possible addition of sanitary flows from garden lots should also be considered during this process, because there may be an advantage from a funding perspective if two municipalities are both supporting the same funding application. And this one is quite interconnected to the near term. It could be started right away, or it's possible as well to wait until Project Lunenburg initiatives are showing results. But there are some cost savings that could result from the near-term items, especially in starting sooner rather than later, and also operational cost savings. The flow control is really important to the success of this expansion. And the pre-design report could be carried out once there's confirmed project funding, or it could also be done prior to that if it's desired to move the project ahead faster. The further ahead you get in design, then typically the easier it is for a funding application, because there's a more definite project that's being applied for, and also the funding bodies can see that a lot of resources and effort have been put into it already. Right. Okay, next slide, please. The main recommendation from the building condition assessment is to start working through the 0 to 5 year recommendations and begin to implement those. The main cost in those 0 to 5 year items is the roof replacement, and so that should start to be planned for the main process building. It would be reused in the SBR expansion, so it's still important to have it in good condition. And then there's 2 items, the blower room fan replacement and the headworks plumbing repairs, which are actually both in the building condition assessment and the near-term items. And so those could be done either as facilities management or as part of the near-term upgrades, whichever was made the most sense. And then to also implement the other 0 to 5 year items for facilities maintenance. And I think I've already gone over the interconnections with the reusing the roof, for example. So go to the next slide, thanks. Okay, so we put together a possible schedule for how this could occur, but I do want to mention that it is a fairly aggressive schedule and that it assumes that some design would be carried out prior to a confirmed funding for the project. And there's also some higher risk items such as regulatory applications, land acquisition, and funding applications, which can take longer than planned and may take longer than is shown on this. We really can't predict how long those specifically will take, but the project schedule proposed here assumes that things go relatively smoothly and that the town is putting together step by step a clear plan to get to the recommendations in this report. And you can also see how they could compare to each other. For example, that there is less, that the Outfall construction could be completed before the construction of the long-term expansion, if that was desired. And that the near-term upgrades, at some point, it would be getting so close to the expansion that there wouldn't be a reason to do them in advance of the expansion anymore. And then the facilities maintenance is going to be an ongoing project that extends for the first 5 years and then into the future to maintain the facility that's there. So a fairly aggressive schedule would be that the Outfall would be completed by 2024 and the plant expansion could be completed by 2025, but those definitely have some risks in the schedule that may need to be revised as the projects develop. Okay, next slide, please. And I was also requested to do a brief summary of what the ongoing related work has been over this year and also planned for the fiscal year. So there is work being carried out for the saltwater reduction initiative, both engineering for repairs to the Blue Nose Drive sewer and the installation of check valves at pumping stations to reduce the inflow there. And then there's money budgeted in the look ahead budget, at least for construction of the Blue Nose Drive repairs. Also sewer separation, that project 1 of 4 small separation projects is to be carried out this year. And then the master plan is identified for next year, and that will gather a lot of information on the existing town assets, the storm sewer and also sanitary sewer, and do modeling to show where would be most strategic to do sewer separation work. So both of those are quite important for the expansion. And I've already discussed the blower replacement. That is in the budget for this year, but town staff would actually like to have another look at that if it looks like the expansion plan would be, or the expansion would be happening within the next 5 years. And the chemical feed pumps as well are scheduled for this year. The AC unit at the plant has already been replaced. And then the polymer dose reduction is from the data that we got from the DAL study that happened over the past year. It looks like there is clear evidence that it may be possible to reduce the polymer dose without either affecting the plant compliance and giving the opportunity of reducing the polymer carryover into the harbor. So staff are still interested in trying to do that and to reduce the dose at the plant as time permits. But since there then wouldn't be the backup, probably wouldn't be possible to get a dose. So they'd have to be more conservative, and it is based on whether there's enough time to fit it into their normal activities. But I think there is still a possible benefit of reducing one of the major nuisances with that harbor users and residents experience of polymer carryover to the harbor. All right, thank you very much. Do you have any questions on this?
Thank you, Sarah. We'll open the floor to councillors with questions. And unsurprisingly, on all wastewater matters, we have the deputy mayor first.
Okay.
Thank you, Worship. Through to Sarah, please. Sarah, so you have a lot of emphasis on the outfall as being the lead part of this project, but that also, you're also sort of indicating that that has some of the more variable things that could delay the project. So if we want to address the problem, you know, would it be more efficient to address the plant and then continue on with the outflow? Because there's no environmental problems, there's no land purchasing problems with the plant itself. So would that make it a more efficient process, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that the plant expansion is a more reliable process on the whole than the outfall. There are more risks, as you noted, to the outfall expansion. So it might well make sense to put more emphasis and more effort into the plant expansion because there are more reliable results. However, I think that you won't, with the outfall in its current location, even with better effluent, it's still in a place where there just isn't very much dispersion. So the problems that are experienced at the outfall won't go away just by changing the effluent. They'll be improved, but not completely resolved.
But we can get there faster, I guess, and that's why I'm looking for you to recommend the way that we can get there faster. I'm not saying that we don't do the outfall, because I think ultimately we have to do the outfall as well. And in fact, if I want to, you know, address my other passion is the storm surge barrier, that I think that should be at the mouth of the harbor, right? So, I mean, in order to do that, obviously we have to have our flush out further, further afield. So, yeah, I guess I'm just kind of looking for you to sort of recommend that to us as a way forward, a faster way forward, because I think that's really, you know, where we want to go. We want to get this initiated as quickly as possible. And we also established in our other meeting when we talked about polymers, polymers are a nuisance. They're not a pollutant. So we want to address the pollutant part first, right? First and foremost.
Yes, in that sense, the plant does provide a direct way to address the pollutant in order to get better pollutant removal at source, as well as addressing the polymer, which, as you note, is a nuisance. So I do think that there is a more reliable path forward with the plant. The outfall could certainly end up being delayed in the regulatory process or several other risk areas.
Yeah, I kind of read it as if we would start the two right now. The obvious one that would get delayed is the outfall because it's probably more complicated at the end of the day and more people involved to get it through. So therefore, probably by the time that gets approved, we've already accomplished part of the problem, right? The core of the problem. And then we can put the aesthetic part of the problem on. It almost will flow naturally as opposed to one getting in the other's way.
If you want to choose just one, then at least as an initial effort, then probably the plant is the more reliable one. However, since the regulatory and other risk items can take so long, it might be worthwhile on those pieces of the outfall and see how far some will ultimately benefit the cleanliness of the harbor and the experience of residents and harbor users.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to get at, right? So that's like, I guess it's not quite packaged that way here, right? But if we did it, and I'm saying, that's what I'm saying, we want to do both. So if we do both, it will make more logical timing if the plant looks like it's out in, because when I'm sitting on our thumbs a little bit with the plant while we're working at the outfall, right? And I don't
Okay.
want to sit on our thumbs with the plant.
Yeah.
Which leads me to another question. Is there any, obvious cost savings by moving more rapidly on the plant than if we would sit on that for a little while?
I wouldn't say that there's a lot of buffer time in the plant either, because those longer periods of time at the beginning are gathering data that is necessary to go into the plant design. So it can't be brought forward much. It's already assuming that the pre-design would take place before the funding was confirmed, so that you'd be doing design work to move it forward. I suppose it would be before funding was confirmed as well, if funding took longer than expected. But there isn't really, there isn't just sitting back and working on the outfall.
It's all a house
So
of
it
cards,
may,
right?
yeah, it may look like that, but it really isn't. So I don't think that the plant can be advanced faster by doing more on it initially. And with the longer regulatory periods for the outfall, some fairly modest things could be started to get that moving forward. And then if that does take longer than projected for regulatory reasons or other risks, it extends and it ends up being done after the plant. But there is a benefit, I think, in getting started on those ones so that you don't want the outfall in place and you're still waiting on the regulatory process to take the time it takes.
So we start both, and the more natural process is that the plant will probably be in the works or completed by the time.
It may
we
well
get
be,
the
yes.
other
Yeah.
projects done. Okay, no, thank you.
Yeah, I think we're all, I don't want to speak for council, but I think we're all hopeful that Sarah's aggressive schedule will be met in all aspects, working simultaneously. I think the deputy mayor's question is, if that's not the case, then we do have to prioritize. What do we prioritize? If we have to, if funding from other levels of government doesn't come through. I've got Councillor Sanford next for the question.
But I'm hearing guys that we can start both at the same time, and that's where my question was going, but it's eventually gotten to, we can, if I understand correctly, we can start both at the same time. One may or may not get held up along the way, and that's okay. While it's going along and whatever the process is, the plant will still continue on, so both are being worked on at the same time, because at the end of the day, the extension has to be moved, has to be relocated, regardless of what's coming out of it, is what I thought. So that's where I thought we were.
And I think in the long term, that's where we are.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think we're all in favor of the whole plan.
Yeah.
It's just we don't have the financial capacity to fund the entire plan ourselves, which brings a level of uncertainty to the implementation plan. I'm optimistic sufficiently to do this, but that's,
Two.
yeah. I've also noted that in my experience, being skeptical while you're being optimistic is always a healthy exercise, as I believe you'd agree with, Councillor Sanford. Councillor Halverson.
Well, if it'll help, I bought lotto tickets. I'm willing to contribute. Depends on the outcome of that. Most of the questions, thank you, Deputy Mayor, have been addressed. I guess I want to make sure we can do this simultaneously. If the outflow gets held up a little bit, we really have to address the core issue. One of the things I was looking at was we were talking about the polymers, and I was wondering about the dosing. So where Dow's not involved in that now, I mean, there's no reason why we still can't. You say that we're worried about the resources and the folks being able to do their jobs up there as well, but I mean, that's something that I'm sure we can fit a little time into to try and reduce that. I mean, if we can reduce that, great. I mean, if we have to put up with a little smell in the meantime, fantastic. But I think we want to address that as soon as we can. Is that what the polymers addressing that? What kind of time? I'd like to get appreciation for what kind of time's involved in dealing with that, trying to monitor it and make the adjustments. So why is it taking so much time out of the staff time?
It's because it takes a fair bit of testing to ensure that the new polymer dose is not reducing the plant's performance. And the most important thing is that the plant meets its compliance requirements, and therefore a reduction in the dose may mean that it's gone too far. And the plant conditions are always changing as well. So there could be high flows coming in one day, low flows another, and that would call for a different dose. So there's a lot of factors to look at. That means that without DAL's support, then the town would need to do that testing themselves. A significant time out of the day to do the testing on the days that testing is planned. It needs to be done in a really controlled manner so as to avoid not meeting provincial and federal regulatory requirements, while simultaneously reducing the polymer dose if it's successful. The jar testing looks really positive that the polymer dose can be reduced, but sometimes full-scale systems don't behave the same way. Sometimes they work better, sometimes worse. So we don't really have a range at this point of what the likely dose would be. And the main DAL support would have been through the laboratory testing. So that's what the town staff would now have to take on.
And does the town have the capacity to run those tests? Do they have the equipment and the skills they need? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
They do.
Time.
It's time.
Okay. And then I guess the further question I had regarding running both projects simultaneously, the wastewater treatment and the outflow, is again talking about resources. We're talking about the wastewater treatment plant, the water treatment plant folks having trouble with keeping up. What about the wastewater folks and our engineering staff? I mean, if we're trying to run two of these projects concurrently, in addition to their daily grind, do they have the time to run these two projects at the same time?
Well, because of the regulatory applications that form the main part of the outfall, then a lot of that is to submit something and then wait for government response. So there are downtimes in that you could use to work on other parts of the project. We'd also recommend that external consultants do a significant amount of the design work. That's not something that a typical town is able to take on internally. And it's possible to get additional consultant support for things like regulatory applications to give the town more time effectively to carry those out. But I do understand certainly that decisions have to be made on what's realistic and what time people honestly have and what resources are available to get external people to support.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Sarah? There is a draft motion provided. If somebody would like to move it, that can always be amended, defeated, whatever. But is anybody happy to move the approval of the proposed implementation plan? Yeah, giving thought to that based on your earlier statement, I thought that some language that you might approve of as a mover would be something to the effect of just tacking on to the end, prioritizing the long-term expansion of the plant and essential items as required, or something to that effect. And I'd look to Sarah and B if that gives clear enough direction to staff and consultants in the future. Sorry, Councillor Moser was suggesting an amendment that would be prioritizing, and please, Councillor Moser, weigh in if I haven't captured what you're talking about correctly, to put on the end of the proposed motion, prioritizing the long-term expansion of the plant and essential items as required. And by essential items, that would be near-term upgrades, buildings, things that are dire. Does that capture your intent, Councillor Moser? Is there a seconder for the motion, Councillor Halverson? Is that clear enough direction to staff?
Yes, Your Worship, we can add that, no worries. But just you may want to have a commentary about the financial components, how to phase that in and where money sources could be found.
Well, I think the
that.
prioritizing captures the lack of money would be what would cause us to prioritize.
That's a priority.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that's sufficient. It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion or debate? Councillor Sanford.
So by prioritizing the wastewater treatment plant itself beyond or over the extension, the outfall extension, that doesn't sound like what we were discussing. So I thought we were discussing both of them would move forward together.
Yeah, I think.
So when you say prioritizing the plant, that, in my thinking, puts the plant ahead of or above and ahead of the outfall extension, when I thought we were discussing them both going forward at the same time.
So what I would say, and anybody can weigh in if I haven't captured this accurately, like I think that we all hope that we get the funding from other levels of government simultaneously. I think to the CEO's point, that's not something we can necessarily bank on. So we've got the ability, the finance director can correct me if I'm wrong here, but to basically take out a debenture to cover our third. And I think the intent of the motion where we say we don't get as much funding as we're hoping for from other levels of government, say it's just our debenture of our third of the 10 million, give or take what it is, then what would we focus on? Because we simply can't do all that stuff at the same time unless those other levels of government come through with funding. Correct?
That is correct, Your Worship.
Able to do all the long-term expansion things or near-term up without help from other levels of government either. So we'd have to, within that, prioritize according to staff. But
So I understand about funding, and yes, we need funds in order to move forward. But what I'm not getting is if we move forward simultaneously, to Sarah's point, there are things in that process that may have to be on hold and wait. We're going to be waiting for things for. What I'm not hearing is that is what we will in fact do, is move forward with both aspects, the plant and the beginning of the approvals and so on. So if as those progressed forward, money became an issue, then it would stop at that particular point. However, it doesn't stop before it gets started, is what I hear when we're talking about prioritizing the plant itself.
no, that's why I think the last part of the motion is if required. If it's not required, then we just keep going ahead with everything.
But
which
it
is-
doesn't
which is
say,
ideal.
but it doesn't say I guess I'm thrown by the prioritizing.
Prioritizing if required.
Yeah.
So we hope that prioritizing is not required. I think we all hope for that. Deputy Mayor, one way, and then Councillor Albertson.
Yeah, that's sort of, what I was thinking. So we start this off, we probably get all the pre-design work done for both projects. But then if for whatever reason, whether it would be regulatory, we couldn't proceed with one, then we would, the obvious focus would be on the plant then to go forward, right?
Councillor Halverson?
Yes, just follow up. I mean, really just, it provides, to me, what this motion does is provides very clear direction to all parties involved, how we're going to go forward. And, in case of situation, just keeps it coming back to council and further hanging it up. So we're giving that direction right now so that there will be no no more, any unnecessary delays by having it go through a process where it could be, a month before it gets to us when something needs to happen quickly. So that's wise. I think.
And we have a very ambitious staff, and I know
We
they won't
do.
take that as license to not try to do the whole thing at once.
Yeah.
And a very ambitious consulting team, I might add. Is that clear for everyone? Is there any further discussion or debate? Yeah,
Just to make sure I captured it, because I might add a little something. Moved and seconded approval of the proposed implementation plan for wastewater treatment plant upgrades and treated effluent outfall extension as outlined in the CBCL summary report, prioritizing the expansion of the plant and essential items as required, including potential funding. Follow.
yeah, I think you can just cut it off.
Okay. As
And I
required.
think that what would cause, I think we're all aware of that. Is that clear to everyone?
So the instructions to staff, your worship, would be to prepare a report as a result of that motion?
No,
No?
the instructions would be to prioritize the expansion of the plant if the entire implementation plan can't be implemented all at once. Councillor Halbers.
The way this, but I see where the CAO is coming from here with the staff. You want to cut it off right there before you get to with a staff funding and engineering phase and analysis report. You don't want to include that part in the motion.
I think it's superfluous, that's all.
Okay.
If anybody else wants to move it, they're perfectly within their right. Or if everybody else is cool with it, then fine.
I guess I would ask if, I mean, I have to, perhaps through you to Sarah, I have to assume we've got Gantt charts here already. You're not going to design a plant without having the phase and analysis. These things are going to come forward as part of the process, are they not? The fund, well, like a funding and an engineering phase and analysis. We're going to have a plan on how this is going to go forward and how what's going to happen when, contingent on these contingencies and funding and such.
I think there is still a reliance on town staff to do, say, funding applications. And so while we could identify, or another consultant potentially could identify that the town could be applying for funding at this point because this is when the design is going to be finished and here's when construction could move forward. I think, I'm not sure that we would typically be advising on funding applications in particular. That tends to be out of consultant scope of work for engineering.
I think what we're trying to get to here, perhaps maybe Ms. Dagley can offer some clarity. We're just trying not to hold this up, right? So if we don't have to wait for, another report from staff, and this can go forward as such, great. If this is something that's going to be included kind of in the scope of work already, do we need to include it in a motion calling for a report beforehand?
Well, I think as the motion is written, that it says that staff, implement the plan as outlined, but prioritizing plan if required. I guess that's the part that needed to be there, that to know that I can't haul up my checkbook tomorrow and say, sure, we can go ahead as exactly as outlined by CBCL this evening, unfortunately. And so that we do need to be aware of that. And so as we're trying to move all of that forward, there will be times that staff will have to adjust that. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to bring in an additional staff report at this point, but there may be times when we get hung up there that we may need to bring an additional staff report forward for council to make a decision about how we move forward from there.
Okay, that's the clarity I'm looking for. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Sanford I had, and then the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, whatever the reason that we can't implement the whole plan, that would initiate a staff report to say, we cannot move the entire project through for this reason. And therefore, if we've already established, then the priority would fall back onto the plant because we don't want something else going on. We still got the old clunker plant there going along and we still got the problems there, right?
Yeah. which would presumably save time because
Yeah.
staff would know what the priority is prior to writing the
Yeah.
report. All right, so we'll cut the motion off if required. If everybody's good with that. Is there any further discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Now we got to go find some money. There are wastewater and water treatment quality information reports. Those reports are provided for council's information, and the engineer is off, but we do have someone on the line if there are questions. I'm assuming that councilors were able to go through that prior to.
And Ms. Eslin is available to
And Ms.
review
Eslin
them.
is-
She assisted in their preparation, Your
She
Worship.
assisted. Okay, perfect. Thank you, B. Are there any questions? Councillor Sanford?
When I was looking at and again, I don't have it in front of me, but the chart or the table for average monthly daily flow of wastewater for 2021, I'm wondering, and these are more exploratory questions than anything, I'm wondering if there was any consideration given to an overlay of the 19 to 20 overlay of the monthly daily flows. And I'm thinking about the impact that COVID has had in the context of people coming to the town. And if we were to overlay the same months and look at the same outflow without having as many visitors to the town, it might clearly point to the impact that the level of tourism or visitors to the town has on the particular outflow. And then along with that, I was thinking about if we understood the monthly rainfall per month, overlaid on that as well, we would be able to see if December, February, and April and May, if there were increases that were associated with an increase in rainfall amounts, and that would speak to rainfall water entering the systems. So there's an opportunity. I guess one point I'm trying to make is there's an opportunity here for us to be able to look a little more closely at a piece of data that can show us really potential impact of reduced visitors to the town on the output in the wastewater treatment plant, and also the levels of runoff infiltrating the systems to the plant that contribute to the outflow from the plant without any big reports to be written, right? Yeah, I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks. So
Thank you.
pass the floor to Sarah if there's any necessary response.
I can confirm that the flows were lower in the past year than they were in the year before. And actually, the data analysis that you've described is basically what we would go through in looking at plant design criteria, and also to look at what the effect of rainwater is. So definitely that data does get used and it does get analyzed in about that way.
I think Tourism Nova Scotia has a whole new data point they're not factoring in.
Yeah, no doubt.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the proposed capital budget pre-approval of the purchase of the second phase of the wastewater lift stations radio and control upgrade project. There was a staff report written by Dennis. Able to join us. Is Sarah speaking to this as well? She is not. Is anybody?
If in a pinch, I don't know, Sarah might be able to answer some questions. Might be putting me on the spot.
I might be able to answer them. I'm not sure. It depends on what they deal with.
All right, well, I mean, the report was very clear, so if there are questions, then councilors can pose them. Otherwise, there's a draft motion as provided. If anybody's pleasure is to move that. Councilor Sanford moving the motion? No. Okay, question? Nope, ask it now.
So as I look through the document, I'm seeing that the phase 2 bid for the lift station, in relation to the lift station, is $20,000 higher than it was initially anticipated. So I was wondering how that happened. How did we arrive at that figure?
Sorry, Your Worship. If you're looking to myself, I think they were just preliminary estimates, Your Worship. And so when we actually went and priced it out, they were higher. There's a lot of technical equipment components to it, so there might have been, yeah, so we're done, and these were the results of them.
Thank you. Another question, please. As I read the bid was received for both phases. So I'm thinking if the bid was over by $20,000, how was that acceptable? I didn't understand how that would be awarded if that were over by $20,000. If the budget was set.
Worship. The second phase wasn't, that's what, it's acceptable as it would carry out the work that they were asking for. And that's why the staff report is brought forward, so that they could have that additional budget included, and that it would be pre-approved so that work could be carried out early in the fiscal year, rather than waiting through the entire budget process next spring.
Okay, thank you. One last question, please. Can you tell me who was awarded the phase one contract? Can you tell me who was awarded the phase one contract? Yes, phase one.
Your Worship? Yeah. They do a lot of work at our facility already. They're technical electrical experts in the area with our SCADA system and other components. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions at this stage? Is it anyone's pleasure to move the draft motion? Councillor, Deputy Mayor moving the motion. Is there a second? Councillor Ernst. Is there any discussion or debate on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. You may. You just leave whenever you want, Sarah. This isn't a courtroom. Technically, it's a courtroom. It's just not a hearing. Next, we have the Province of Nova Scotia Acknowledgement of the Town's Accessibility Plan. So this is for information. So if there's any questions on that. All right. Seeing none, we will move on to the second quarterly report of the Comprehensive Community Plan. There is a staff report, and I will turn it over to staff to walk us through that.
Great. We'll just catch up with you there. I'll save the minutes until I can launch into this. So, Your Worship, you have the report before you. This is our third quarterly status report for the time since the Comprehensive Community Plan was adopted back in November of 2020. It is the second quarterly report for this fiscal year, and it reflects the period of July to September. We're kind of stretching it out. We haven't quite finished the month, obviously, but it was prepared in anticipation of the end of month cycle. The notes contained in the PowerPoint presentation, which is the format we are using for this report, reflect new updates since the last report for your first quarter. Turning to the second page in the slide deck, this is the high-level overview of the overall Project Lunenburg status. As you know, it's a foundational year for the implementation of the Comprehensive Community Plan and our 5-year more specific plan representing the 35 strategic direction action items. Most notably in this quarter, we wanted to highlight the adoption and approval of the Municipal Planning Strategy Land Subdivision Bylaw revisions that were formally approved as of September 22nd when they were advertised. There was a press release that was issued on behalf of the community, and there was considerable media uptake, generating some very positive coverage. And we're optimistic that the simplified planning approval process outlined in the new planning documents and the media release will encourage new development in the community. The next slide, we 10 graphic icons for our strategic direction, 10 principal headings, and there are multiple action items that fall within it. What we'll try to do this evening is to focus on one, or maybe more, but ideally one key priority project within each of those strategic directions. The next slide encompasses the Gantt chart that was earlier prepared. As the note indicates, the chart shows the blocks of activity as anticipated early in March of 2021 when we first presented the Gantt chart, and the 35 individual Gantt charts with the detailed work plans that were outlined in each of them. The red line is very important in that it indicates our year-to-date work progress. And from that, you'll note that in many instances, we were actually ahead of schedule. That was, I think, due in part to Council's early approval of the budget, prioritizing comprehensive community plan items, and I think that stood us very well. And then staff mobilizing quickly to do the implementation components of that. The vast majority, though, are projected timelines, so most of them are on time. Fallen slightly behind time because of matters of control. There was a component of the Project Lunenburg, the Heritage Bylaw review, that unfortunately could not go ahead because of the consultant's workload, as you may already be aware. So that put us slightly behind on that component. But overall, very positive indication. It's not the easiest slide to out and for you in greater detail because it encompasses a wide swath of information, as you'll recall, because each of those lines is in and of itself one complete Gantt chart. Page, this is where we'll highlight some of the key items within the 10 strategic directions, Your Worship. In the first strategic direction of community structure, we were pleased to advise, or we are pleased to advise, that the request for proposals was prepared for the solar feasibility studies. This is for both the water and the wastewater treatment sites and the general environs there, wherever consultants they think may be feasible. It's a new area for us because you never know what people might think is possible in regards to the building or the general grounds. And that will close in approximately the next week, and we'll hopefully have an award of contract by the end of October. In some of these instances, it's helpful because this is new territory for us to have presentations made by the bidders, and it helps us to choose the best proponent to move ahead with. In the next slide, we're looking at housing. Some positive news on the regulation of short-term rentals. As you know, they're partly covered in the new land use bylaw for the community. And we're also discussing with some of our provincial colleagues about a pilot project for Lunenburg County that would help to develop for all municipalities in the province some baseline regulations, measures of control, and monitoring for short-term rentals. We're just awaiting word from the provincial government if this is a pilot project that they will pursue. All of the other units in the county at the CAO levels at least are interested in that. We initiated that project proposal. Turning then to servicing facilities, as Ms. Enslin was addressing you tonight about our wastewater system. First and foremost, there's been a considerable amount of effort made on our collection system on making significant upgrades to our lift stations. So the means by which the raw effluent is pumped to our treatment facility. And as you know, that's a very critical part of our treatment system. So very good efforts made in that regard by all staff. And we have concluded the study with Dalhousie, which was a published report, as I understand, regarding the use of polymer and means by which to reduce that. Turning to mobility, the next strategic direction, as you will note in action item 30, the goal was to, or is to, improve connectivity between Old Town and New Town. And there's been a lot of activity that's set out in that slide there. In particular, we have some projects moving ahead in June of next year. for the Montague Street pilot project with Bicycle Nova Scotia, giving the community a bit more time to prepare for that and a little more opportunity for collaboration with the Board of Trade and individual business members. So we're very pleased to see a lot of effort put forward there. In economic development, next, first and foremost, we have Mr. Casario, who's joined us as our economic development and funding manager, assuming quite a significant responsibility there. So this is the first time since we've had a development commission that we've actually had a full-time development and funding manager. So a very important initiative for the community, again, made possible through the budget that council approved. There are also a number of joint initiatives, as we can see here. We've had new agreements with regard to fire inspection, parking enforcement, accessibility coordinator. So a lot of excellent efforts there made with our municipal colleagues who have been very cooperative. In the field of heritage, flipping ahead a couple of slides there, it's action item 22. And when I mention an action number, as they're outlined in the report, that's referring just to the sequencing within the strategic plan itself and the implementation schedule at the back of the document. This is the policy to encourage accessibility and to provide heritage design guidance, and we've had two major achievements in that regard. The Lunenburg County Accessibility Coordinator, a new position that's funded by all 5 municipalities, has been filled. The person is working on a part-time basis currently and is going to convert to a full-time role, and they'll be instrumental to implementing and enhancing the reported on earlier in this evening's meeting. Some upgrades to our own facilities to make accessible by members of the public accessing various public services within them, including the academy. The staff of the town developed in-house a brochure about accessibility ramp guides, and that's very useful for both residents and businesses. Needs of specialized construction standards for that, so that's available online free of charge, and as I say, that was done by staff. Turning next to the strategic design action number 19, the goal is to activate streetscapes through design and programming. And as this year that we wanted to have funded, but given our pandemic position, but we were able to successfully complete the Tannery seawall and some further garden project that was earlier funded. So those were nice to see successfully completed. And I think they're very well utilized, particularly the one on Tannery Road, and it would be nice to look at further expansion. We even had a private memorial donation of a bench to the area. So it's nice to see the public endorsing that through their own personal donations to those kind of initiatives. Regarding environment and sustainability, action item number 21, to regulate buildings near the shoreline. And as well, we note on this slide, action 27 regarding wind and solar projects. So in the planning documents themselves, there are provisions regarding flood mitigation requirements on new builds with reference to our flood study modeling that's had some recent press coverage as well by the Royal Bank of Canada, which was a partner with a similar project with BayCap. So we've had a lot of good PR regarding that. And then there's going to be more provincial legislation in that area. There's ongoing consultation in the area. So I think that will just buttress the work that the town has already done. And we've, again, issued the RFP for calls for proposals in regards to the solar projects for the community, which will be really interesting to see the outcomes of those. Our budgets are a little tight, so hopefully we'll be able to get, good submissions on both. Next is culture and recreation, and action item number 18 under the heading of Special Committee to Promote Anti-Racism and Decolonization. And in this last quarter, I think we've made great advancements in regards to the issuance of requests for proposals as well for consulting services to prepare a municipal action plan regarding anti-discrimination and racism initiatives. taking a positive approach to ways in which we can enhance the current initiatives of the community. Most recently, the design or the consulting team was selected, Live Infinitus, and they have begun their orientation process and will hopefully be convening a special committee meeting very soon to actively engage with the members of that group to prepare the plan and have it ready for you by the end of this fiscal year. Flipping ahead quite a few slides because the presentation is rather bulky. I appreciate that. There's a lot of work to be done within it. The slide for governance, focusing on action item number 14 to undertake an organizational review. And this encompasses a broader reach in the request for proposals, as many of you may know. The request for proposals we issued reflects the terms of reference that links a variety of comprehensive community plans, including the preparation of key performance or performance measurement indicators, and then following through with that, a reorganization for the community that may look at the staffing structure for the community, as well as perhaps some governance components for council and committees. And then finally, what enabling bylaws and or policies of the town need to adapt to meet those changes to help achieve the comprehensive community plan, all of which will be very worthwhile projects, particularly with some of the staffing changes we're going to be having in the upcoming months. I think it'll position the town very well to make those adaptations. In our final slide, we note what the upcoming steps are for the next quarterly report. That's projected to be presented at the January 11th, 2022 meeting. And the final quarterly report for this fiscal year would be presented in March of next year, with the approximate date of March 22. So that encompasses some of the major priority projects that we've been working on, Your Worship, and I'd be pleased to take any questions, as I know the other staff who are here, and I do thank them all. There's been a big team that's worked behind all these items.
Thank you, Bea. Are there any questions of staff at this stage? Councillor Duggan.
I'm just wondering, what's the projected time frame for the Tannery Road sidewalk?
So, Your Worship, that item has a limited budget for this year. It's approximately 50,000. So we have the goal for this fiscal year was to try and complete some of the land transactions required. There's 5 primary property owners. The majority are positive. They understand that this is an important project for the town and will no doubt be a benefit to their immediate property. So we're moving on to the appraisal phase. They just came in the other day, and we hope to proceed with an award of the appraisal project. And the appraisers would be in contact with the property owners to let them know what they're doing, prepare reports, and then hopefully we can reach agreement as to sale price, and go ahead with the preparation of, there's various subdivisions that'll have to be done and deed transfers and whatnot. So quite a bit of legal work that goes behind. That queues us up then for construction, ideally in spring of next year. But there is quite a bit of legwork to be done still, but we're making good progress.
Okay, I have one more question. What is the process, or what process would we have to go through to name the park on Tannery Road? Because it doesn't currently have a name, and I think that it deserves one. And it's a little bit awkward to just say park on Tannery Road. So I would like to know what that looks like.
There is a policy that speaks partly to that, Your Worship. I think we need to take a look at it, and it was more for sponsored locations and facilities. So it might be helpful to do a special report on that, but it could, I don't think it's restricted. Probably determine that amongst yourselves, but sometimes places like to do and, you know, look for students to make submissions and that sort of thing, kind of make it a fun opportunity for community input.
Thanks. Councillor Sanford.
With regards to the application in the Blockhouse Hill box, what specifically were we requesting funding to do, please?
Last received word that we weren't successful. We were looking for seed funding for the various initiatives within that $40,000 budget, and we were very hopeful that it would align with the COA's priority projects themselves and funding sectors. But unfortunately, they've been oversubscribed, and it just didn't. Our optimism was not met by theirs in regards to project alignment. But I know Ms. Dagley may have more of an insight into that.
No, unfortunately, just because we just received that word and haven't had chance to look at it, quite fully, but essentially what B has captured is unfortunately the case.
Any further questions from council at this stage? Seeing none, I'm very pleased to see that most of the items are either on schedule or ahead of schedule, but there are two in particular that I just wanted an update on. One is that, site planning for Blockhouse Hill obviously looks like it's quite far behind, and I'm wondering how we intend to meet the milestones for this year that are in the annual plan by the end of the fiscal year. And the other one was, because I think this is important, the assessing of the arts and recreation facility needs and developing a long-term recapitalization plan for that space. And in both instances, I'm just wondering, is that a staff workload issue, and should we be looking to get some consulting help, because those are fairly big design and process projects. So I'm just looking for a staff update on that. How do we catch up? What do you need?
To be honest, Your Worship, I think I would need to provide a follow-up staff report on that just to indicate what impediments or needs there might be. I think you're quite right in that. I can't speak specifically to that at this time. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll thank staff for the report, and that takes us on to the variance report, which I believe is the first one of the year.
It is, Your Worship, yes. It's the variance report for the first 4 months of the fiscal year, or 34% of our year. Overall, the revenues and expenditures are where I would expect them to be at this point. We've just gone over the CCP and telling us where we were in each project, and so the first 9 pages sort of give you those capital statuses as well, but with the financial component. So there perhaps isn't any questions with those ones. I would just maybe reference page 9 or 10. I wrote 10, but it's actually page 9. That provides the departmental overall budget summaries, and I just thought that might be a good point to bring forward the provincial press release from last week about the Municipal Financial Capacity Grant, which previously known as equalization, and just so where you would find that and what our grant is. So it's in that top third under unconditional transfers. The town receives the base grant of $50,000, and so this year we'll be receiving that additional $50,000 in revenue while the province undertakes a renegotiation of the memorandum of understanding with municipalities.
Okay.
And then, I just wanted to briefly touch on the D-transfer tax and parking that was on the next page, on page 10. Just noting that, collections of D-transfer tax for capital purposes that are collected in a particular year are typically used the following year, and that the rate change was effective August 1, so that's not captured in this report because that only went to July 31st. And while we had a slower start with parking meter revenue this year, things seem to be picking up, and I still hope that will come in on budget by year end, because we've had some revenue from the movies, etc., in town as well. Unless there's, happy to answer questions or anything, Your Worship.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Dagley at this stage? Seeing none, your green check marks are always appreciated.
Maybe I'll just note that sometimes you see it says a project is completed and there isn't a green check mark, but that's because I'm waiting for the actual financial component to catch up, and that's when they get the green check mark.
Perfect. Counselor Halverson with a question.
Oh, just make a note here as I'm flipping through. I just noticed, looks like we won't be spending that $1,000 over at the LCLC for the para hockey again this year. So
I had actually heard that on the radio this morning as well, and it had noted it for us as well, so. I was like, what math? There's $3,000 there. Well, now 4, I guess. But yeah, council has the ability to do that if they wish to.
I don't think that's going to get us from March to September, though. Okay, that takes us on to committee meeting minutes, recommendations, reports, and notices of motion. There is one recommendation there for public session from the Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee, and it is to review and confirm the town's policy with no changes pursuant to section 27(1)(c) of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Are there any questions on that, or is it anyone's pleasure to move the motion as presented? Councillor Sanford, move in. Seconded by Councillor Duggan. Any discussion or debate, excuse me? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. All right. The REMO minutes are provided for information. Steering team minutes are there for information and public session. That takes us on to meeting in camera. So moved and seconded to meeting camera to consider the items there. If somebody would move that, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Sanford, all those in favor, opposed, motion's carried. We will recess for 10 minutes while we move in camera.